We're headed into winter, as we know, which suggests a time of perhaps regrouping and fighting and maybe even recalculation and even negotiations. But if either side is inclined towards that, they're certainly hiding it very well. Meanwhile, Russia has half destroyed Ukraine's energy systems, which is going to lead quite possibly to a major humanitarian crisis and maybe cause Ukraine to attack Russia itself. The bigger picture is whether Putin, after making a big gamble and suffering maybe even bigger humiliation, is inclined to escalate or to cut his losses.
Is winter tilting the war in favor of Russia, or alternatively, can Europe survive a warring winter? Dan?
I think Europe appears to be prepared to weather the economic difficulty imposed upon it by its own unwise decision to become energy reliant on Russia. That appears to be more or less of a done deal. They're not going to buckle under because Putin has not only made his threats, but has essentially made good on those threats and caused them some pain on the energy side. So that's just very clear. I don't think that will change. What may change is if some horrible disaster happens in Ukraine. If the humanitarian crisis becomes so profound that there's enormous loss of life and it might even erode the Ukrainian willingness to continue to be as defiant as they have been. And we heard it from Maria. I mean, they want to liberate the entire country, and they want to go ahead and liberate Crimea, which was lost in 2014. And there's a lot of bravado there. And I mean, it's inspiring to an outsider to see the underdog behave in this fashion, but the reality is that the winter is going to be very brutal on the Ukrainians, and the Russians do have the wherewithal to make it even worse. I mean, they can destroy the energy system altogether and do much more, and they've shown a willingness to execute maneuvers that really harm the civilian population. Part of why they're so spectacularly unpopular right now in the West.
Dan Perry, please. Yeah.
I think Michael's right. As was the case from the beginning, we have basically three players here: the West, the Ukrainians, and the Russians. The West is at a run rate right now. They're going to do what they're doing, which is defending Ukraine at a certain cost structure, rather provisioning Ukraine at a certain cost structure that is acceptable to the West, even though it's painful. The Ukrainians, as I say, are manifesting great bravado, and they're going to fight to the hilt no matter what, even if no one has electricity. I'm not so sure about that, but that's their position, and it's courageous and admirable. The pivot factor is Putin. Putin will decide which way this goes, and it's incredibly annoying, and it's undignified for the West, frankly. And we don't really know which way it's going to go, and I think much of the West is assuming that Putin will keep the war going, at least as a war of attrition, unless he's brought down. Now, how do dictatorships come down? Russia is not in a position where it's likely the people are going to bring down Putin. It has to come from an insider rebellion, as has happened in some dictatorships, or a military action.
NATO ministers are convening in Bucharest to decide or discuss future assistance to Ukraine, and perhaps suggesting that NATO is having second thoughts on its expansionist policy and the price that comes with it. Dan Perry, your thoughts?
Well, NATO is a bit of an alliance in search of a mission, and I guess they feel they found one now, not just in China, but also in the case of Russia. Now, look, the heart says yes, they should expand because Russia has proven such a menace to its neighbors, and a line should be drawn in the sand and a point should be made. But the head says, I think, no, because it may give a plausible grievance to a bad faith player, which is never a good idea. And also, NATO is perfectly capable of defending whoever it wants, even without formal membership, as Ukraine has shown.
Right.
How do dictatorships end? They generally end when insiders or the military put an end to them. And that may be a scenario that's coming in Russia. The other alternative for dictatorships to end, or for dictatorial regimes to fall apart, is when they lose energy and they lose hearts and they just give up, the way, interestingly, the Soviet Union did. This version of the Kremlin does not appear to be willing to admit defeat. It isn't in their DNA to admit defeat, and that is a very big problem. When you have a player who acts that way and probably isn't bluffing, then they need to be defeated. Maria's right, they need to be defeated. The question is, what does defeat look like? What does defeat look like that doesn't push them so much into a corner that it brings about a worse result than a continuation of the war?
Well,